isn't it?
It is, yeah. Thank you. Brazilian Psycho had just come out today. In fact, it's the final part of my Sao Paulo quartet of novels, but it also is a good place to start in that all of the books are standalone, but this one goes back and then tops and tails the quartet of novels. And yeah, it did come out today, exactly. So it's very nice to be here.
Did you want to tell us a little bit about sort of the quartet of novels before we get started?
Yeah, so my first novel, Paradise City, came out in 2017, and it is a fairly straightforward crime novel from the perspective of a detective called Mario Leme, and it's based around very kind of true elements of what was going on in Sao Paulo at the time. The next two, Gringa and Playboy, develop that theme. So we have 2014 and then 2016. So the idea of the quartet was to try to capture something of the city, something of the truth of the city, but through a narrative, a fictional narrative that would be interesting to look at from a kind of crime perspective. And Brazilian Psycho, the final part, goes back 10 years or so before Paradise City begins, and then finishes a few years after Playboy. So the idea of the quartet is to try to capture something of Sao Paulo and you know, necessarily Brazil from 2003 to 2019, and to think about how in Brazil Lula, the socialist left-wing president, was elected in 2003, and then of course Bolsonaro just a few years ago, and what tragic kind of consequences that has had. So yeah, the idea of the quartet was to kind of think about how that change has occurred, why, and it seemed to me that looking at the crime elements was a way in to try to kind of consider that question.
Good. Why is it set in Sao Paulo specifically?
I live there. That's the kind of the straightforward answer to that. Yeah, I lived there from 2002 to 2012. A couple of breaks, but basically there for that period of 10 years. And when I came back to London, where I was born, I started to think about that. I wanted to make sense of that experience, I think, without it being necessarily a experience that was purely about me, I guess. And it's it's a city that is both dynamic and energetic and exciting, but it's also got a huge amount of inequality, a huge amount of crime. And it felt to me like a city that enabled a narrative, a crime narrative, to try to kind of unpeel various layers, really in a way that you could be giving a portrait of a city or a place as much as you could a kind of murder mystery, if you see what I mean. So ultimately I lived there and I was fascinated by what I'd done or how it had been being there. I wouldn't have necessarily chosen it. It chose me, perhaps, if that makes sense.
So what drew you to live there?
My early 20s, I was teaching English as a foreign language in London, and I went out there to teach. I ended up working at a British school, an international school, a very prestigious one, which was particularly interesting because I was teaching students whose parents were very, very important in the city. So, for example, one of the mayor that I mentioned of Sao Paulo in the novel, his granddaughter was taken out of a class I was teaching to be told by the headmaster that her grandfather was just been arrested, and father as well, on kind of corruption charges. Mick Jagger's son goes to the school. So I was suddenly thrown into this world whereby of immense privilege on the one hand, and yet I lived in the city as a normal person who also had access to other parts of it too. So I went not knowing a great deal about the place, but stayed because I found it such an entertaining and interesting place to live. And then all of these other elements like that kind of strange dichotomy of rich and poor, of crime that affects people in certain ways and other people in no ways at all. And I kind of developed that interest as I was there itself, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I did wonder, because you don't look old enough to have lived in like somewhere else.
That's so kind of you. Believe me, I think I probably am.
So you've talked about the bits that are based on real events, and that's quite clear in the book because you sort of refer to the real events. How much of it is based on real people?
That's a good question. Yeah, the events and the framework and the structures of the city of the novel are absolutely true, I think. And there are, as you say, there's key moments, and I'm quite clear in the novel which bits are. In terms of real people, that's a good, yeah, that's harder. I was friends with a lot of different kinds of people, might be one way to put it. I was friends with expat teachers. I was friends with Brazilians who were liberal Brazilians, who were artists, who were actors, who were restaurateurs, whatever. But then I was also friends in the condominium where I lived with some older Brazilians who perhaps had a different experience of life. I'm saying specifically from Sao Paulo, the kinds of people that were. Sao Paulo is a very liberal city. Has very diverse and left-wing principles, but it's also run by a kind of conservative elite. And I think that I had a lot of experience of both sides, if that makes sense. My main character in the quartet is called Mario Leme, and while he's a detective figure and is probably, is the character that threads through the 4 books, he's not, I say main character, he's one of the few, but he was based on an idea more than a specific person. The idea being that there can be a person who's a decent, honest man who's also tired of the kind of corrupt elements of working in a place like Sao Paulo, and yet is not a kind of crusader. He's not quite sure how to negotiate the structures. And his name actually was based on my friend Mario, who was, he's 20 years older than me, who I used to play tennis with. And then a guy called Reginaldo Leme, who's a very famous Formula One commentator and journalist. And the name seemed to come together, and it actually represents something of these 2 people who are old, as I said, older than me, different experience of the world perhaps, but specifically they were fairly conservative and traditional guys in a very conservative and traditional society, but they had that leaning towards liberalism, understanding that there's something not quite right in the world, but not quite sure how to fix that. And I suppose that's where my main character came from. The other characters are different, and there are many, as you know, in Brazilian Psycho. But throughout the series, he was the anchor, I think.
Yeah. That's a whole list in the back, isn't there?
Yeah.
In my copy, anyway, there's like a list of all the people in the back.
Yeah. I mean, that list was something that I decided to do. My publisher thought it was a good idea because it was able to hopefully show the scope of the series. And many of those characters they're in it briefly. Some of them are real. Al Gore is in there, I think, at the beginning, because of anecdotes or connections to people who are in the book. But yeah, the key kind of 5 or 6 characters grew from people I knew, or people or ideas about the city that I kind of encountered as well.
So, do you speak Portuguese?
Yes, I do. I haven't done much in the last few years, but I do still. In fact, I was, there's a local pub here where my son is enthralled every time he sees there's a woman who works there who's Brazilian, and I've been chatting a bit more in Portuguese recently. But yeah, I do speak fluent Portuguese, but it is a bit rusty.
Because there's a lot of kind of slang words and things that they use when they convert the books. Obviously, like all the conversations are in English, but there's a lot of slang words and things throughout, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. Go on, sorry.
I kind of wanted at the end, along with a list of the characters, like a list of what the words were.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, in fact, in books 2 and 3, there is a glossary of terms. This one, I was hoping that there was enough context, but I found with my first book there was too much of the Brazilian slang, the Brazilian phrases, Portuguese phrases, obviously. And in books 2 and 3, I did do that. I put a glossary in, and I was hoping in this book that it would be clearer. The idea, I suppose, was to create to use the Portuguese to give a sense of, defamiliarizing what's familiar. I'm hoping that there's enough clarity in what's there for people to understand it, and to try to create a sense of, oh yeah, we've got characters speaking in a different language, if not in a language that we can't understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it works. I mean, I think it's a book. I think at times you kind of have to work a little to sort of understand it. But I feel like it's a book that at times you do have to work a little to kind of understand and follow all of the events, if you know what I mean. There's like a lot happening.
Yeah.
Which isn't bad. Like,
No, I hope
it's
not.
interesting, and there's a lot that's really interesting, and I feel like I've learned quite a lot about Brazil.
Well, that's good. Yeah, no, I mean, it's not a straightforward plot, is it? The idea was to try to create a series of stories within that would give a portrait of the city and an idea of the country and how that works. I'm aware of the style being a part of that, and the use of Portuguese occasionally is a part of that too. It's to try to create an atmosphere. There is the thread of a plot throughout, which is what, when I first conceived of the book, I didn't have that story that went from the beginning to the end, and it was a bit episodic. And I feel that when I finished the novel and worked on it with my editor, it was that singular narrative sort of came through, and that was good, because when I first began it felt a bit episodic, and perhaps confusing in terms of the way things connected. I'm hoping it's not too confusing now.
No, it's not. I'm enjoying it, and I liked saying I had to work with the slang. I don't think it wasn't a criticism, if you know what I mean. I do think it gives the flavour. My criticism, if I have one, is this is my personal opinion, is I'm not really keen on the like little files and things at the end of some of the chapters that recap.
Right. No, yeah, no. I mean, I use those. Those are non-fiction. Most of them are real documents and insert to try to. One of the things I'm interested in doing or trying to do is to combine fiction and non-fiction as forms, and to demonstrate how you can use non-fictional sort of techniques or approaches to bolster and perhaps support the fictional element. Also, it can obviously create a clarity. If you feel that they're not needed, that's good too, because perhaps the story tells itself. Perhaps I'm being unfair on myself as an attempt to clarify things. But yeah, that the idea for me was to try to produce a novel which used non-fictional techniques to create something that would kind of cross the two forms. But again, we'll see.
So Laura Hamilton has said, and this goes neatly into one of my other questions that I've got. She says, it looks interesting. Can you read this one as a standalone, or should you start at the beginning of the series?
You can absolutely read this as a standalone. All of them can be read as a standalone, but I would actually say that perhaps this is the best place to start. In many ways, it starts in terms of chronologically speaking, it starts in 2003 and finishes 2019. But the vast majority of the book is 2003 to 2011. The other three books cover 2012 to 2016. You could argue that one way to do it would be to read the first 3/4 of Brazilian Psycho, then read the other 3, then the end. But that's a bit ridiculous. But no, I would suggest they're all standalone, and I would say this is a good way to begin, because if you enjoy this, then the others will make sense thematically, stylistically, and I feel this is the good place to start. Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the things I was going to ask you is it's described, and I think you described it as well, as like both the beginning and the end of the quartet. I was just curious as to how it sort of was both.
Yeah, no, it's because I think the first 3 books they're set in very specific moments, but they do have a broader reach to them in terms of context. I wanted to write novels that covered a week or 2, perhaps a bit more, a bit less, but had broader resonance in terms of the historical sort of things that were going on. And when it came to writing the 4th book, my publisher was talking to me, and we were discussing what the 4th book might look like. And my original idea was to just do, the next installment, but still keep it as a quartet. And we talked about it a bit and decided that a bigger book that covered more ground and captured something of the idea of what the quartet was originally supposed to be would be an interesting thing to have. So that's how that kind of came about. It was a sort of practical thing of spending time thinking about how the book might look. So when I say it begins and ends it, I mean, chronologically speaking, that's true. I feel that you could start in the quartet with any book, and if you enjoy it and like the setting, the characters, the style, then you can then go in any order. I feel with this book, because of the scope and the breadth of it in terms of time, the period that it covers, there's a lot to, in some ways, if you like this, you'll definitely like the others. I suppose is the short version, the short answer to
that. Sam Brownlee, who's like the other half of my author chat team here, she says, which relationships have you found the most interesting to write so far?
That's interesting. So relationships, I'm assuming you mean within the novels, of course. Well, one of the most, I mean, it's pretty clear for me. The main character, Mario Lemi, I've mentioned, the detective. In book 1 and 2 and 3, he is recovering from, he's grieving and recovering from the death of his wife, who was killed in that comes out in the first book, but also the other books too. And a lot of the first, especially the first 2 books, were dealing with that relationship, or that now lack of relationship. But of course the relationship exists, but there's the sort of the idea of grief, the idea of how that might look for someone who is the kind of character that he is. And in Brazilian Psycho, in the first 2 or 3 books, I had scenes where there were memories or flashbacks of the relationship happening. So I showed that relationship, I think, and I hope there was a kind of there was a sort of love story that threaded through and underpinned those first 2 or 3 books, especially the first 2. And then in Brazilian Psycho, I went back and showed that relationship develop and had it happen in kind of real time. And that was a really exciting thing to do, to watch this relationship that I conceived of in my mind and had pan out in quite a different context happen in that sense. And one of the most exciting things was to give the character of Renata, who is Lemi's wife, to give her in the early books, she was, her work, her character, her personality was hinted at, or it was seen in moments or flashbacks or moments of kind of dialogue. But to give her a stage and a full kind of platform to be herself and see her work and what she did, that was probably the relationship that was most interesting. But that was, and also of course a complicated thing to think, how can I create a character or develop a character who already exists and make sure that it's both credible, compelling, and also fits in with the woman that we've been introduced to in a more fragmented way in the later books, or the earlier books, sorry, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like I've got a spoiler alert for the end of the for the end of the book now.
Not exactly. I think well, maybe the end of the quartet, but again.
Sam says grief in particular is a difficult topic to write about. How was it to research?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how do you research that? I suppose what I did was I thought about the character who was grieving, and I looked at kind of psychological profiles of how someone might be and might grieve, but then I also kind of based it on a kind of instinctive feeling of my own experiences. I suppose the research more was about the nature of the death of his wife, and trying to understand what it would mean to lose someone in such on such terms that he does, without spoiling, and trying to kind of think about and process that idea of it's not, you know, my experiences of grief are sad and unpleasant, and as a family member, let's say, for example, or as a friend, but the manner of that grieving, it doesn't have a lot to do with, or hasn't had a lot to do with, nature of death, I suppose, if that makes, you know. So I think the research element was trying to decide, or trying to figure out and work out if that made a difference to grief. Does it make a difference how, or what difference does it make? And thinking about, especially someone with the job that the character has. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was difficult to research so much as perplexing and troubling. That would be the way to answer that.
So while we're on the topic of research, how much sort of research did you have to do for this quartet of books? Because it is so invested in a real place and with real events.
Well, I mean, I lived through most of the period too. So the starting point was my own experience. The second starting point was other people's experiences, who I knew well, who I would talk to, and I lived in a condominium with an ex-cop, for example. I lived with a lot of the anecdotes in all of the novels are from people I knew, either friends with or just new kind of associates, I suppose. And then, of course, you start to investigate. You hear a lot of rumors. Brazil and anywhere else, something happens, people have opinions, rumors accrue. I would say the media is a little different than it is here. Newspapers, it's less exploitative, less fantastical. So when you read the newspapers, the two kind of key newspapers in Brazil, they are more trustworthy than the British press, perhaps, if you see what I mean. That you don't have the sensationally gossipy element to them. So perhaps in some ways it's easier to find a way into discovering about a certain event or a certain place or a certain person. What's the actual truth? Where does it go? Is there a truth, I suppose? So the research for me was a lot about, and I'm, speaking Portuguese, I was able to read quite a lot of original documents and original newspapers and so on. But equally, there wasn't a huge amount of sort of stories that have a conclusion.
Lives in the favela, doesn't he? Can you tell us a little bit more about his kind of aspect of the story?
Yeah, well, I lived in a condominium building in Morumbi, the area, and it's pretty much next door to this favela, Paraisópolis, which means Paradise City in English. And so my experiences of, and I drove through it a lot, I went through it. There were people who lived there who would work at the tennis club that I would play at. I was taken to bars there and so on. So I without wanting to claim any kind of grand knowledge of the place, I did have some understanding of it, some idea. And Rafa was a Rafa would be the Portuguese.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. I was just thinking myself. Rafa Rápido. He was he was some a kind of character that I felt could thread his way through the book and could be someone who was sharp and exciting to be with, and who was both inside and outside of the criminal element of the story that was going on. And I really enjoyed writing that element, especially the kind of the early parts of the story. And yeah, I mean, I spoke to and knew kids like him, I suppose. That's the way to put it. But I don't know what they did or what they got up to exactly. So there's obviously a leap of imagination there. But the kind of situation that he was in at the beginning of the story is something that I was cognizant of and aware of, and felt that I could then develop. And I feel like his story is a redemption narrative in some ways. Is it a happy ending? I'm not sure, but there is definitely an element that was fun to write about, but also validating from the perspective of trying to create a story which does show more than one perspective in one story. I feel like it's his character is one that is both entertaining but also true.
Yeah, I feel like he grew the most as well across all of the years. He's sort of slightly different in every one. Like his roles changed, or what he's doing has changed, and his relationships with the people around him changes like a lot through the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the covering 16 periods. It's nice to have a character that progresses, isn't it, through that period. The other characters, they come and go a little bit, or they're adults already, or they learn lessons, but they're doing what they need to do. It was nice to have that kind of young character to then see how all of the different machinations and the higher level political elements, how that might affect someone of that age and in that position.
Yeah, that's so true. Sam says you've had some great comments and reviews from many places. Do you have a favourite? So, like at the front of the book, there are a lot of nice comments and reviews from like the Times and lots of different authors. And
yeah, I think do I have a favourite? That's a good question. To get any kind of acknowledgement anywhere is really nice. It's really difficult to have any exposure at all in coverage, and I appreciate anything, to be honest, and without wanting to sound too faux humble, it really is. It's lovely to get any kind of an opportunity like this, for example, is a lovely thing, and to have people share their thoughts. I think for me, in the inside cover with those quotes that are there, I think it's for the ones from Jake Arnott, Kathy Unsworth, John King, Nick Heron, Lucy Caldwell. Those comments mean an awful. Paul Willets as well, especially. They mean a lot to me because it's from people I admire as writers. So these are people that have read the work. And Lucy Caldwell is a first reader, so we share work with each other at an early stage. And yeah, so I think in many ways it's her comments, whether it's in the print or not. But aside from that, I do like there's an Irish Times says that Bent, my last novel, was a blend, an inspired blend of something. It was a cross between like early Pinter and David Peace, and that was that was one I particularly liked. That seemed to capture something of what I wanted to try and do in the book.
So this one sort of goes from you sort of referred earlier as to it having like a central plot but being quite episodic, and it does sort of go from like there's quite a main cast of characters, isn't there? So you're following along quite a lot of people. Do your other books focus in more in this like series? Do they focus in more on like one branch of that story? Is this like the overarching one, and then there's
they do. I mean, they focus on specific elements, but they also have the same breadth or range of the political side too. But they do tend to focus on one. Well, I mean, I would say they are more focused versions of Brazilian Psycho. Brazilian Psycho goes a bit broader because of the time and the period, but the other three books have perhaps one or two key character kind of narratives, and then one or two important contextual narratives too. But ultimately, it's the same kind of principle in terms of there being a fictional, hopefully a fictional, compelling fictional character set within a complicated factual scenario.
Samantha also said that she read that personal experience went into Brazilian Psycho. How much of you is in the book?
I guess the personal experience element is living there, having lived there, and some of the detective Mario Lamy lives where I lived. The school in the book is where I worked. Many of the places that are in the novel, the places I went to or spent time at. So the personal experience is more the idea of gathering information about the place and trying to present it. I tried as much as I could to keep myself out of it, in the sense of that I don't think there are characters that are fictional versions of me, for example. But that's the personal experience is more about the kind of the world that's built there.
Fair enough. Why do you think? Because I can't think of many other crime novels set out in Brazil. Why do you think it's feels like quite an underexplored place for kind of literature over here?
I don't know. I'm kind of surprised by it myself. It lends itself to that. There's a book called Heliopolis by a guy called James Scudamore, which is interesting, more of a literary novel. There was another book I've read set there, but I wonder if I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know really the answer. I thought when I was writing the first book and then publishing the follow-ups, I figured that there would be an interest in a place that was foreign and exciting. Whether that's actually true or not, I'm not sure. I mean, crime fiction readers do like going abroad, don't they? I wonder, and Sao Paulo and Brazil does have a lot of the kind of commonalities that would make that interesting. But no, there isn't a South American noir thing quite like the sort of Scandi crime yet. But maybe there will be. Fingers crossed.
Maybe you're the sort of spark that's gonna start it going.
Well, I don't want to say pioneer.
Yeah, pioneer, and because it feels. I feel like it could be a kind of a show eventually as well. It's sort of got that.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I feel what I wanted to produce in this book, especially, was the broad cast, the big cast, the different versions of a story of a place. And it's not an easy thing to thread those things together in a way that feels credible. So yeah, that's a nice thing to hear, because that's partly what I suppose I was looking for.
But it reads in a way that sort of you couldn't imagine watching, tuning in and watching them.
Yeah, well,
That makes sense.
it does. No, it does. Yeah, absolutely. I can't really. I wouldn't be. I'm not quite sure how it would be adapted or whatever. But the principle of the story would be the same, and that's something that's exciting, I think, as an idea.
Someone wants to know what other places or countries could you imagine using as a setting for a book?
I think that beyond Hackney, where I grew up, which is my next project, and Soho, where I've written about, and Sao Paulo, it's very hard for me to kind of think beyond those terms. I don't know. I'm not sure. I guess I haven't. I feel like that a lot of the reason for working on these books in these ways is figuring out places I've been to and spent time in, whether I've grown up in them or spent significant time as an adult. And that's the key, that's the motivational thing, the reason to write about the place, to investigate that. So I think that it was difficult for me to consider other places at this stage, but I'll let you know.
Are there any other places that you would like to go and live?
Well, my partner's French, and our son is half, is half French, I suppose. And so, yeah, France, I think I can see myself living in, and will, I suspect, live in not too long at some stage. I hope so. Whether it's in Paris or nearby, we'll see. But that's a different choice, and whether it will lead to further work, I'm not sure.
Okay. So do you want to tell us a little bit, because you have got a book set outside of Brazil, haven't you?
Yeah, there's one.
Interesting when you were telling me about it.
Yeah, so there's a novel called Bent that was published last year, which is set in Soho in the 1960s, and also behind the lines in Italy in the Second World War, which is based on a notorious detective who was in the SAS with my granddad. And that novel was a really interesting book to write, and really kind of helped me understand that you can write outside of necessarily where you've lived or been or grew up, just purely in terms of the period. And yeah, it is a historical novel effectively. So, and that's led me to want to write more in that form. And my next project is based in from 1978 to 1990, when I was growing up, but a period I remember, but not as an adult. So I'm looking forward to exploring that further.
Okay. And then another question from Sam's got all the questions tonight. What resources have you found helpful as an author?
The internet. I think especially when you're writing about a foreign place which you're not living in anymore, but you know well. Two resources: useful friends and the ability I lecture in creative writing and English lit at Hertfordshire University, so I've got access to a lot of academic resources too through that. But all of them are kind of virtual articles, documents, journals, and so on. That's incredible. I mean, I can't really imagine writing these books without that. It's fair enough to have to find the text and read them in physically, but that is a huge thing. And it sounds obvious, but really to be able to look something up, and then know that you've got to read a lot or not about anything has been hugely important.
Do you read a lot?
Yeah, I mean, normally I would. The last 6 months I've been struggling a little bit, and I wonder how much of that's got to do with lockdown, how much it's to do with having a young son, how much of it's to do with being busy with my own writing and teaching. But I'm still reading a fair bit. Last year I read a lot, but yeah, I generally do. I get given books by friends and publishers, which is nice. I try and keep track of what's going on. I'm reading Joseph Knox's new book, True Crime Story, at the moment, which is interesting because it reminds me of the sort of popular culture music oral histories, which is what he's doing in a crime context, which I'm enjoying it. It's really interesting to read that. So yeah, no, I do. I hope, but not as much as I would like to, and not as much as I did. Put it that way.
Do you like to read crime?
Sorry.
Do you like to read crime?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do, but I don't read as much. Recently, I read David Peace's new novel. I interviewed him for Crime Time, and that was magnificent. Really good piece. As I said, Joseph Knox. I really enjoyed reading the Sarah Gran novels when they come out. James Ellroy, I can see there's a question who's been inspirational. He was a huge inspiration, especially his novel American Tabloid. And then but other than that, crime-wise, I don't devour crime novels on a weekly kind of basis, but there are writers I admire hugely, and I follow their work and make sure I'm reading it when I can.
Well, that's a good question from Laura Hamilton. Have you seen it? She said, as the series covers similar timelines, how organized did you have to be so you didn't contradict yourself between books?
Incredible. It's really hard. I did contradict myself once or twice and had to fix it. That's very organized. I had to have a very good copy editor and good editor to make sure that the dates were right. In Playboy, in the third book, I deliberately set some dates that looked wrong, and then I realized, but I left them because that was a sort of on purpose. But you have to double check. It's difficult. There were moments where I panicked, and even still do, and occasionally pull the book off my shelf and go, is that the right one? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like by having real events as well, you probably made life even harder.
Yeah, well, with Playboy, for example, it starts off at an event that takes place on a Sunday in my novel, but the event that it's based on took place on a Friday. And it was really important for my novel that it was a Sunday, and yet it couldn't have taken place on a Sunday in real life. So I had to kind of work out a way of making it credible on both fronts. So it's tricky. But you go back to it, you read through, you have an editor and the copy editor that makes sure that it at least adds up, if nothing else.
Who reads your books first?
Well, Lucy Caldwell, you mentioned, the writer, she does. My agent, Will Francis, my editor, and then my partner, Martha. So those few people are the ones whose opinion I kind of take on board initially. Yeah.
One of our group's favorite questions to ask is, what are your most memorable moments as an author?
That's a good question. I think that every time this is my fifth novel, and every time a book comes out and something interesting happens, like there's a nice review or a piece that's in the paper that you've written, or an interview like this, or it's always new, it's always exciting. That doesn't get old. And I think as I've published more novels, I've kind of realized that the value in it is doing these things and enjoying these things as they come. So to be honest, the memorable thing is the next thing, or the current thing. And it's a really nice thing to realize that you've got a certain amount in your control as a writer, i.e. you can try and write the best book you can hopefully have the people around you that can create that product and also that book. But then after it's out in the world, there's not much you can do. So it took me a few books to realize that there's no need to get too worried about reviews or prize listings or all of those sorts of signifiers or markers of prestige or quality, and just to enjoy it. So as a result, I hope now, and I have been for a couple of years, I hope the memorable things happen all the time.
Good answer. How do you find that split between writing, research, I mean you lecture as well, and then marketing your books? I know you've got like a publisher and things that help that, but even then you still have a bit
well the teaching part of the teaching is that I spend some of the time writing. that's kind of part of my contract as a lecturer, which is good. I work part-time there. And I just, I guess I manage the time well. I'm quite disciplined with when I got a moment to write. It says there as well, social media. I don't do any social media. So that's one way of avoiding that. But with my publicist, I tell her I do, I'm really interested to do anything really. So it's not, I don't need to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours a day and feel the need for the muse to descend. I just sort of enjoy and try and find the right time, and I'm fairly efficient in that, I hope. Yeah.
Good. Becca Carpenter wants to know if there's any plans for audio versions. She thinks the quartet would be a good listen. I agree.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'm not sure. I don't know the answer. However, sadly, it'd be great. That'd be my publisher's domain. But yeah, I'd be well up for that.
And one of my favourite questions to ask at an interview is, would you make a graphic novel version of one of your books?
I mean, I couldn't because I can't draw for toffee, but I think it'd be fascinating, wouldn't it? I'd love that. I wasn't hugely interested or a big reader of graphic novels. I honestly, I'm not a big reader now, but my partner is a big fan, and one of my friends who's an editor, he publishes quite a few, and I'm starting to understand the nature of those better than I did a few years ago. So if you'd asked me this question about 3 or 4 years ago, I probably would have said, it doesn't bother. But now I kind of understand that there's a possibility there that could be fascinating in a book, which I hope, like in books like mine, which I hope are quite visual in the descriptions and the setting and so on. I'd love to see how someone might transpose those to a visual thing. If you consider, pictures, dialogue, then I think that would work well. So yeah, I could have nothing to do with it, but I think it would be fascinating to see what someone might.
There's normally artists and writers, isn't there? There's not like you wouldn't. No one.
Yeah. Really yeah, you're right. I just mean in terms of deciding how it would look, but I suppose I could help with the dialogue.
Yeah, I think there's people sort of. I ask this because I'm quite a fan of them, and people sort of just think that graphic novels are all superheroes and things, but actually, it's quite a lot really good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm starting to understand that better, and I feel stupid for having the opinion that I wasn't interested in them before. I'm glad to be corrected on
that. Do you have any writing rituals? Apparently, Peter James likes a vodka martini when he sits down to write.
I would love a vodka martini every time I sat down to write. That's going to be my new ritual. But no, I don't really. Just trying to. No, I don't really have any rituals. I'm fairly pragmatic. Find the moment and try and use it the best I can. If I don't worry about it. If it doesn't work out, move on. Wait till the next time. Don't agonize. That's the ritual. Don't agonize.
He has an amazing writing room as well, Peter James. He writes up in this like little tower in. I think he still lives in Jersey.
In Brighton, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got like a little tower room, and it's kind of got views all around. One of the times, he's been on a couple of times in the group. One of the times he sort of took us on a little tour around when we did the
program. Wow, fantastic.
With the web camera.
Yeah, that's great.
Where do you write? Do you have like a set place or a?
No, I don't. I don't. At the moment, I'm working in the University of London Library most days. I live in central London, and I go out between about 9:30 and 3 o'clock and go there and try and work at the moment. Otherwise, no, I wrote most of my latest novel in France, in Normandy, but that's because I was staying with my partner and her parents, and with my son being the age he is, it's figuring out the best time to sort of write around that. I used to think writing first thing in the morning was the best thing, but I'm discovering that's not necessarily true. So I kind of feel like you can adapt, or you have to adapt, and then also once you have, it's straightforward. So no, I don't. I'm not hugely precious about that.
Someone wants to know if you visualize scenes as you write them.
That's a good question. I mean, with the Sao Paulo books, I'm often trying to remember or remembering experiences or places. So trying to color those scenes with those memories and images. Writing Bent and the historical novel, it felt liberating in some ways because I wasn't alive in the 60s, or I wasn't there behind the lines in the war. So I could do the research and gather some sense and then create the scenes and places. With the Sao Paulo books, I was there. So I wanted to be faithful to my own memory of being there. So the answer to that is yes, but in different ways for different books.
So it's like a running kind of gang in the books. There's I feel like there's almost two gangs. There's like the like company that's investing for things, and then there's the actual gang. Are they real? Are they real things?
Yeah.
Does that really exist? Does the
sorry for coughing. Yeah, they are. They're the major kind of criminal gang is that's the same name that they have, and then the kind of military police element too. Yeah, they are. Obviously, my knowledge of them is based on some kind of experience of seeing what happened, reading about them, and then some imagination. But I try to stick carefully to what I kind of learned. But yeah, those are the real things, real figures.
Do you write short stories?
I don't. I've tried. I find it. I can't. Well, maybe I could. Maybe I should. It's not something that I'm more into. Yeah, I have sort of tried, but not tried very hard. I'm quite. I'm more interested in the kind of the grand scale, the big picture of the novel. Not that short stories don't do that. It's a different skill and different thing. And I feel that at this point I'm not equipped as a writer to be able to take them on. I hope to. Maybe that's the best answer. I hope to.
What I like in sort of these big overarching series and like complex things with lots of characters to ask is, would you write kind of a spin-off novella of some of the? Like,
yeah, that's a really good question and a good idea. I hadn't thought of it, but why not? Yeah, that's a really good idea.
I'd 100% read the one about the lady who runs the cafe.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's a great idea. Actually, that is. Yeah, you know, I will put that. I'll think about that carefully because you're right. That would be an interesting way to work a shorter piece around something that I'm kind of comfortable in as a way into that. Yeah, I'm scared of short stories. I don't think I'm a good enough writer, perhaps. But that is a very good idea. Thank you.
Right. Just there are some of the characters that you sort of come across and you're like, I'd read. Like I'd quite happily pick up another sort of thing that was just them telling you sort of their backstory, because I feel some of them have got like really interesting backstories.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's kind. I think that no, I'm already thinking about how that might work. How might that look?
Sam's asked, do you remember the moment you found your writer voice?
No, I don't. I think that it's still developing. I think I remember in writing Paradise City, the first book was a way of understanding how the voice might look, and I think that I think these things always develop. I think there's an element of, I don't know, you want to write confidently, but how you don't want to feel overly confident. Sorry, the pollen is just coming in through the window. But the short answer is that it was writing Paradise City that I became confident in what I was doing, and I think the voice is still developing from there. Sorry, I'm really sorry. I'm genuinely, suddenly pollen has gone to my chest.
It's fair enough. It's not a nice time of the year, is it?
No, exactly.
I think you've got an interesting one. What type of crime is this being marketed as? Because you know, there's like sort of genres of crime like cozy and gritty, and I run a crime book group, and I can't think of any more than that. I'm sorry.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I'd sort of try and leave that to the publicist. I think it's social crime, whatever that means. Social, gritty, political, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. But it's not. Yeah, there aren't labels, perhaps that there might be for others. But that's not to say that the labels aren't useful or otherwise. I'm really lucky in that I'm able to produce these books and not worry too much about that. And that's not about them necessarily being hugely commercially successful, but I just mean in the sense I've got a publisher that gives me that opportunity, and isn't too commercially kind of worried about that, which is good.
Yeah, because they're quite a different style, aren't they? I feel like they're very literary.
Thank you.
Crime.
Right, Martha, just bring me some water with the coffee here next door.
Yeah.
Oh, and the lights come on, even better.
Oh, that awesome.
Yeah.
We all need someone to deliver drinks and.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, that thing where we live's got loads of the pollen coming off the trees and literally just coming.
I feel your pain. I took antihistamine before I came upstairs.
Very good. Sorry.
So we've got 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you want to give us a recap of you and your books?
Well, mainly thank you for Martha for the water, which is obviously helping. Yeah, no coughing. Sorry. So yeah, the new book, Brazilian Psycho, wraps up and tops and tails the Sao Paulo Quartet. And I hope it tells a story of the city, Sao Paulo, and the country, Brazil. I'm so sorry. And yeah, and those 4 novels, I think, are in the kind of hard-boiled political crime genre that we were talking about. And then I published Bent last year, which is the standalone, which is opening up new avenues for what happens next. I hope that's enough. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. It's fine. I'll just show off the cover. Now I've pulled.
Yeah, thank you. It does look great, doesn't it?
Yeah. A big book, and I am going to finish it. I'm very
pleased. Thank you very much. I'm very flattered.
It's an interesting read. If I wasn't writing my entire school reports for the year, it would have been finished.
Thank you.
And I will finish us off with a quote from Samantha, who says, "Thank you both so much for a great hour. She's got more books to read."
Thank you, Samantha. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
And when she says that, she does.
No, I'm thrilled. That's very sweet. Thank you very much indeed.
Although, like me, she has an excessive TBR, so.
Excellent.
And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Very good questions and really, really interesting to talk about the book and the other books too.
Good luck with the rest of the publication day.
Thank you very much.